Innovation is very much on the agenda for Deloitte at the Asian Financial Forum 2014 here in Hong Kong. And joining us is Kenneth DeWoskin. Ken, thanks very much indeed for doing so. Now, looking at innovation, what is it that you've been finding out?
Innovation is one of, I think, three major changes that are happening very quickly in the marketplace, in the government, and just generally in the region. Innovation is one in which players are changing, of course. The challenges to regulators are increasing. The scale of the financial service operations are getting very, very large, enabled by new technologies and new consumer habits, buying habits, channels for e-commerce and things of that sort. So that's one aspect of the change we're looking at. The other aspect is really part of China's overall reform agenda, in which regulatory responsibilities are changing. Regulations, especially for financial services, are under intense review and will be changing, in part to regulate these new services and new players, in part to liberalize some of the control mechanisms that have been in place since reforms began. And then the third thing is the regional changes. You know, we're seeing, of course, increased regional integration of the economies, but we're also seeing now, very recently and very intensely, the negotiation of new multilateral trade agreements. And those trade agreements are going to have a big impact on supply chains. And they're also, of course, with supply chain impact, then they impact financial services related to settlement, related to investment, and related just to capital transfers and investment generally. So I think those things together interact in very, very complicated ways, and that's what we're trying to sort our way through.
You mentioned earlier that you were looking at multilateralism and bilateralism, but these days are we looking at multilateralism as being dead?
No, I think multilateralism in the old format of WTO has obviously been troubled. You know, the new WTO round has just not moved forward. And in part that has to do with the relative leverage that various players have brought to the table historically and bring to the table now. So I think in some ways we may see the forums for multilateral agreements changing. But I think what's been discovered, especially since 2001 when China joined the WTO, and also at the same time undertook quite a large number of bilateral negotiations to achieve free trade agreements with Southeast Asian neighbors in particular, but actually some countries around the world, subsequently has followed that consistently with a number of discussions about currency swaps, different kinds of investment credits, long-term energy agreements with some Southeast Asian countries and things of that sort. We're now at a point where there's a lot of confusion really between the multilateral covenants and the bilateral covenants. Bilateral covenants themselves, free trade agreements, are very difficult for companies because it just adds an enormous administrative burden to try to figure out what this particular agreement is versus this particular agreement, and then how they all work within the broader multilateral agreements that all of these countries have subscribed to. So I wouldn't say multilateral agreements are dead, but I think that they've got to transform. And I do think also that multilateral agreements, the new ones under consideration, and I put at the top of the list the TPP and the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which China's promoting, and then the TPP, which the United States is promoting, is a new kind of competition, actually, for economic influence in the region.
You're attending the Asian Financial Forum 2014 here in Hong Kong. What are your expectations for the forum?
Well, I think that we're being very bold in the initiative we're taking in the forum. I think that in the past we have talked about things that were a little bit more standard for discussions of this sort, which have to do like with the equity market, the future of the renminbi abroad, and things like that. All important topics. But now we're taking a real step forward, and we're looking beyond the established banking sector at strong global trends and strong regional trends, and then strong trends within China in financial innovation. So we're changing the topic a bit. And certainly on the basis of even this year's experience in China, where during the holiday seasons, the 11/11 day, the Singles Day sales, we saw massive numbers generated in e-commerce. And along with that, a massive shift of transaction settlement activity away from traditional financial service providers. So I think the interest level will be quite high.
Thanks very much indeed. Now, Deloitte is also holding a workshop on the question of disruptors. What are disruptors, really? We're talking to Tim Pagett. Tim, these disruptors that we're talking about in the economies in Asia and the rest of the world, what are they really?
What we're trying to bring out really is what is an increasing trend both globally and particularly across Asia Pacific with respect to the impact of digital and the impact of the increasing use of e-commerce on the traditional relationship between financial services providers and their customers. Increasingly what we're seeing is mobility, right, and stored value and virtual currency is starting to become sort of essence of the vernacular, right, of financial services. And not only that, the traditional participants and providers, those within the regulated framework, right, are being disrupted by alternative providers, where much of the flow, transaction flow that you see now is actually happening outside of the traditional financial services world. And we want to use the workshop to really explore the risks that are associated with that, the market response, the way that organizations, both disruptors and those being disrupted, are responding and reacting and anticipating, and how regulators are going to deal with the nascent issues and risks that are starting to come out.
So because of these disruptors, will companies be looking for greater insurance?
I think the disruptors are introducing variants on risks that are now actually core within financial services. And so the whole rollout of the internet regime, right, and the change to mobility, right, has changed the way that your relationship with a financial institution is now based around your identity, the way that you interact, the security of transactions. And so regulators are really focused around some of the core vulnerabilities, and they're progressing towards it. I don't think it's fair to say they're inadequately prepared. I think they're moving towards it, but it's a very, very rapidly changing world. And within the internet, it's very, very difficult to know exactly what's going on. There are very few people in the world who actually understand how the devices that we use every day, being mobile phones, iPads, any form of tablets, computers, right, work. And what vulnerabilities do they introduce when you're using them as effectively a mobile banking or a mobile saving or a mobile currency device?